Karen Newell always knew how to attract men, and her new husband was no exception. She was beautiful, charming, and seemed to have it all. Their marriage appeared happy, but just 9 months later, tragedy struck. Her husband was murdered right before her eyes in a brutal robbery. The attackers demanded his wallet, but something felt off. Everything seemed too staged, too perfect to be just a random mugging. Was this truly a simple carjacking? Or was the killer a jealous lover, lurking in the shadows? The deeper the police dug, the more suspicious they became. Was this marriage truly built on love? Or was it from the start a perfect facade to hide a ruthless plan? A plan where the price to be paid was John's life. Orange County, Florida, late night, February 20, 1994. On a desolate highway between Cocoa Beach and Orlando, a car suddenly pulled over. In the dim headlights of passing vehicles, a young woman frantically waved her hands, pleading for help. She approached every car that slowed down, and whenever someone stopped, she uttered only one sentence: "Help me. My husband has been shot." Her name was Karen Newell, and the man lying motionless on the pavement, drenched in blood, was her husband, John. He had been shot multiple times. Several drivers stopped to try and help, but it was too late. When the sheriff arrived at the scene just minutes later, he confirmed what everyone feared: John was dead. According to Karen, that night, she and her husband were driving back home to Orlando after a long day at the beach when their car started having issues. When John stepped out to check under the hood, a small sedan pulled up behind them. 3 men were inside. At first, Karen thought they were stopping to help, but no 2 of them stepped out and immediately demanded John's wallet. Karen recalled that the robbery happened too fast. 1 second, they were simply asking for money, and the next, John collapsed to the ground, shot multiple times. The attackers jumped back into their car, sped off, and left her husband bleeding out by the roadside. But the most horrifying part wasn't just the immediate loss. Karen was pregnant. The killers didn't just take John's life. They took away the father of her unborn child. Karen Newell didn't have an easy life. Growing up in hardship left a deep mark on her, but it couldn't extinguish the strong spirit of this young woman. Despite her captivating beauty, Karen's love life was far from smooth. By the end of her 20s, she had already been married and divorced twice. In the spring of 1993, at the age of 28, Karen seemed more focused on her career. The brunette wasn't just striving for success at work, she was also trying her luck in local beauty pageants, hoping to chase her dream of becoming a model. But perhaps Karen's true stroke of luck didn't come from the runway. It came from a small bar in the suburbs of Orlando. That was where she met John Newell. From the first glance, Karen might have been drawn to the tall man with striking blue eyes. But John wasn't just handsome, he was a master mechanic with a good salary, 2 cars of his own, and a decent amount of savings. That night, John took Karen home, but their connection wasn't just a fleeting romance. He was captivated by her beauty, charm, and perhaps something mysterious that set her apart. As for Karen, she too was swept up in the whirlwind romance with John. Before long, their relationship became more serious than ever. On May 22, 1993, just 2 months after their passionate first night, John and Karen decided to get married. Everything happened so quickly, but both seemed to believe they had found their soulmate. After the wedding, Karen excitedly shared with John about a new career opportunity. She claimed that thanks to her connections in the modeling industry, she had landed a job involving television product promotions. This meant a packed schedule, frequent travel, and constant busyness. But Karen reassured her husband that no matter where she went, she would always come back to him. 7 months into their marriage, Karen announced joyful news. She was pregnant with their first child. John was overwhelmed with happiness. He eagerly awaited the moment he would become a father, believing that the baby's arrival would bring them closer than ever. Sean, a close friend of John's, once said that John loved Karen deeply. He always made an effort to keep the romance alive in their relationship. Just days after Valentine's Day in 1994, The couple even planned a short getaway to the beach, a way to enjoy some sweet moments together before their child was born. But no one could have predicted that this would be one of their last moments together. On Sunday morning, February 20, John and Karen packed their bags, got in their car, and drove an hour east to the beach. They spent the entire day enjoying the fresh ocean breeze before heading back to Orlando in the evening. But as they passed the toll booth at exactly 5:28 p.m. and turned onto State Road 520, things took a strange turn. The car suddenly showed signs of malfunction. John and Karen decided to pull over. John stepped out to check, but within seconds, a horrifying event unfolded. Late Sunday night, February 20, 1994, in Orange County, Florida, a brutal murder occurred on a desolate highway outside Orlando. The victim was John Newell, 29, husband of Karen Newell. By the time police arrived at the scene, John was already dead. His distraught wife, Karen, recounted to detectives that their car had broken down, and just as John stepped out to inspect it, a strange vehicle suddenly pulled up beside them. 3 men got out demanding John's wallet, but in the blink of an eye, according to Karen, one of them pulled out a gun and fired multiple shots at her husband. Despite being in shock, Karen was able to provide police with crucial details. She described the attackers' appearances, their car, and even remembered part of the license plate, along with a distinctive bad boy sticker on the rear window. Police immediately issued an urgent alert and launched a manhunt for the killers. Based on the .22 caliber shell casings found at the scene, investigators determined that the 3 suspects were armed and extremely dangerous. However, one odd detail stood out: the assailants had fled so quickly that they left behind John's wallet, the very thing they had demanded in the first place. That night, law enforcement focused on tracking down the car with the bad boy sticker while also heading to the hospital to continue questioning Karen. She was still distraught but lucid enough to answer their questions. A complex case was beginning to unravel. According to Karen's statement, she and John had spent a joyful day at the beach, where they were later joined by a friend named P.J. Giffen. P.J. was not just a friend, but also Karen's assistant, helping her with film production work. After a long day in the sun and waves, the 3 of them left Karen and John in one car, while P.J. drove separately. On the way back to Orlando, Karen claimed she had been following P.J.'s car, but lost sight of him after passing a toll booth. It was then that her car started malfunctioning, with the steering wheel shaking abnormally. John, a skilled mechanic, told Karen to pull over so he could take a look. Karen stated that they both got out of the car. She walked around to check the wheels, while John inspected under the hood. At that moment, another car suddenly approached from behind. Karen, who was crouched near the front of their vehicle, didn't see everything clearly. Then, gunshots rang out. In the chaos, Karen took cover near the front of the car, confused and terrified by what was happening. She initially thought it was just a robbery, but what she couldn't understand was why the attackers murdered John and then left without taking his wallet. Instead of immediately suspecting the grieving widow of lying, investigators chose to explore other possible leads. Instead of rushing to accuse the newly widowed Karen of lying, investigators decided to broaden their investigation. A police report revealed that not long before John was murdered, there had been an attempted break-in at the Newells' home. Around 9 p.m. that night, as darkness settled outside, Karen heard strange noises coming from the backyard. She immediately alerted John, but as he stepped outside to check, he was suddenly ambushed by 2 masked men wielding baseball bats. They brutally attacked him, leaving him in a terrible state. Fortunately, a neighbor heard the commotion and turned on their lights, scaring off the assailants. Karen quickly called 911. Though John was not seriously injured, he was unable to provide any useful information beyond the fact that someone had apparently tried to break into their home. At the time, the incident was dismissed as a failed burglary. However, when John was murdered just a few months later, the break-in took on a far more sinister implication. Investigators began interviewing John's friends and family, but no one could point to any known enemies. John was known as a kind-hearted man, always willing to help others. Yet a surprising detail emerged recently. John had taken in a new roommate, none other than Peter P.J. Giffen, Karen's assistant. What raised eyebrows even more was that P.J. had moved in right after the break-in, and according to accounts, it was Karen who had suggested it. "Why don't we let my young assistant move in? He's such a nice guy." John, trusting and easygoing, agreed without hesitation. But now, police began asking a critical question. Was there something suspicious between Karen and PJ? Was their relationship more than what they let on? And if so, was John's death really a random robbery, or was there a deeper, more calculated crime at play? By late February 1994, a week had passed since Karen Newell had witnessed her husband's murder on a deserted stretch of highway outside Orlando, Florida. She claimed that the robbers had suddenly jumped out of their car, confronted John, and demanded his wallet. However, investigators from the Orange County Sheriff's Office were growing increasingly skeptical of her story. They began questioning the relationship between Karen and Peter P.J. Giffen. Were they really just friends? And was the child Karen was carrying truly John's? Shortly after the murder, police summoned P.J. for questioning. He partially corroborated Karen's story about the three of them spending the day at the beach. P.J. claimed that he had consumed 12 cans of daiquiri, smoked marijuana, and then driven home ahead of Karen and John. But when investigators traveled to P.J.'s hometown of Port St. Lucie and started digging, his story began to unravel. Contrary to Karen's claims, P.J. was not her production assistant. In reality, he was nearly jobless, a high school dropout, drifting aimlessly through life. John's friends had long suspected that P.J. and Karen were involved in something more than just friendship. But what shocked investigators even more was how their relationship had actually begun. In the summer of 1993 on Florida's Turnpike, P.J. happened to spot Karen driving alone with a pair of handcuffs in her car. Jokingly, he told her to cuff him. But instead of laughing it off, Karen gave him a sly smile and began flirting with the teenager. Before long, the two had plunged into a secret affair. But while Karen may have seen P.J. as nothing more than a reckless fling, P.J. believed it was true love. He even told friends that he was married to Karen, an absurd claim, but one that revealed much about his mindset. What intrigued police most was P.J.'s potential motive. If Karen was pregnant with his child, then John was the only obstacle standing in their way. And if that were true, P.J. had every reason to want John gone for good. Although confirming the affair between Karen and P.J. provided a clear motive, investigators still needed concrete evidence to link them to the murder. Specifically, they needed to locate the murder weapon, a .22 caliber gun, based on shell casings found at the scene. Over the following days, police questioned the couple's friends, but a shocking revelation came when they spoke with one of Karen's ex-husbands. They discovered something even more suspicious. P.J. wasn't the only man Karen had been involved with. She had remained in contact with her ex-husband and had even borrowed a gun from him. At the time, her request seemed reasonable to the former spouse, especially given that John had recently survived a brutal baseball bat attack. But the most incriminating detail? The gun Karen borrowed was a .22 caliber, the exact same type as the murder weapon. A simple ballistics test could confirm if this was the gun used in the killing. However, when police asked Karen's ex to turn over the firearm, they hit a roadblock. Karen had never returned it. Now investigators were certain she was involved in the crime. But rather than rushing to arrest her, they needed ironclad evidence that would hold up in court. As they dug deeper into her past, they unearthed another crucial detail. Back in 1989, Karen had a criminal record for credit card fraud. On February 28, 8 days after her husband's murder, Karen Newell was arrested by the Orange County Sheriff's Office for violating her probation. While she was in custody, investigators continued gathering evidence. They interviewed a man named Louis Aragona, Karen's stepbrother, and uncovered a bombshell revelation. According to Louis, as early as the summer of 1993, Karen had approached him with a chilling proposal. John had a $500 life insurance policy, and she wanted Louis to help plan his murder so she could cash in. Louis refused to take part in the shooting, but he revealed something even more disturbing. Karen had already attempted to kill John in November 1993 with P.J. Giffen as her accomplice. Their plan was to murder John in his own home. However, when P.J. attacked, John cried out in pain, prompting neighbors to turn on their lights and look outside. Fearing exposure, P.J. panicked and fled. Karen didn't give up. Just days after the failed attack, she again reached out to Louis, urging him to help her carry out the plan. Once again he refused, but P.J., he didn't. This revelation marked a major breakthrough in the investigation. If Louis's account was true, it proved that Karen and P.J. had conspired to kill John long before the supposed random robbery took place. By late March 1994, the case had reached a turning point. Acting on a search warrant, police discovered a safe in John's home, registered in Karen's name. Inside, they found a trove of financial documents, including all of John's life insurance policies. The most shocking find, a $500,000 life insurance policy with Karen as the sole beneficiary. Not only that, but investigators uncovered a damning fact. In the week following John's death, Karen had already begun withdrawing money from the insurance payouts. She showed no signs of grief. Instead, she had swiftly contacted the insurance companies, demanding the money. The evidence was undeniable. This was no random robbery. It was a carefully orchestrated murder for money scheme. On March 28, 1994, less than a month after P.J. Giffen's arrest, both Karen and her teenage lover were officially charged with the murder of John Newell. In the trial of Karen Newell, prosecutors painted a picture of a cunning woman who had planned her husband's murder from the very beginning of their relationship. They argued that Karen had set her sights on John Newell as early as March 1993, not for love, but for his life insurance money. Just weeks after their wedding in May 1993, she secured the first $250,000 policy, then continued adding more over their 9-month marriage. This ensured that when John died, Karen would become rich. But she needed someone else to pull the trigger, and Peter P.J. Giffen was the perfect pawn. According to prosecutors, Karen used her charm to manipulate P.J., a naive young man, turning him into a killer. She promised love, used sex as a weapon, and even lied about being pregnant with his child to deepen his involvement in the plot. But that lie unraveled the night John was killed. When Karen was taken to the hospital, doctors ran a pregnancy test. It was negative. Even more damning, her medical records revealed that she had previously undergone tubal ligation, making pregnancy impossible. With this mountain of evidence, prosecutors were convinced that Karen was not just guilty of murder, she was a cold-blooded mastermind willing to do anything to get what she wanted. They sought the death penalty. The final piece of evidence came from P.J. Giffen's own testimony. Facing the possibility of a death sentence, he broke his silence in the interrogation room. He confessed everything: the affair, the murder plot, and how Karen had manipulated him into carrying it out. According to P.J., after their failed attempt to kill John with a baseball bat in November 1993, Karen immediately devised a new plan. On February 20, 1994, she, John, and P.J. spent the day at the beach, enjoying themselves as if nothing was wrong. But on the drive back to Orlando, she created the perfect opportunity for P.J. to strike. Karen drove ahead while P.J. followed in his own car. After passing a toll booth, Karen pretended to have car trouble. She told John they needed to pull over and check the vehicle. As they stopped on the roadside, P.J., with the murder weapon in hand, approached. Without hesitation, he aimed the gun at John's head and said, "Consider this a divorce." Then He pulled the trigger. John collapsed, but PJ didn't stop. He fired 3 more shots into John's chest, ensuring he was dead. PJ's confession not only sealed Karen's fate, but also led investigators to the most critical piece of physical evidence, the murder weapon. He revealed that after the killing, he had tossed the gun into a lake a few miles from the crime scene. When police searched the designated area, they found the weapon. Ballistics tests confirmed it was the gun that fired the fatal bullets, but the most damning evidence? The gun's serial number matched the firearm Karen had borrowed from her ex-husband before the attack. This directly linked her to the murder weapon, proving she had orchestrated every detail of her deadly plan. With PJ's testimony, the recovered gun, and a clear financial motive, prosecutors had everything they needed to charge Karen with first-degree murder. Karen Newell's case was no longer a mystery. She had not only manipulated a teenager into killing for her, but had also calculated every move to ensure her plan's success. But would she receive the death penalty as prosecutors hoped? That decision lay in the hands of the jury. Facing overwhelming evidence, Karen Newell had no choice but to take a plea deal to avoid execution. The agreement between her defense and prosecutors spared her from the death sentence, but sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As for P.J. Giffen, despite being the one who pulled the trigger, his cooperation with authorities earned him a reduced charge of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 24 years in prison, a price for being manipulated into Karen's deadly scheme. The case closed with both conspirators behind bars, but the tragedy remained. A man lost his life, all because of greed and the betrayal of a wife he had trusted. Under the blazing fire in the dead of night, Melissa and Gary Cole's home was reduced to ashes. As firefighters rushed to the scene, they weren't just battling fierce flames, they were facing a chilling mystery. Was this a tragic accident, or a crime concealed beneath the fire's fury? For 11 years, Gary had promised Melissa a better life, a refuge from the wounds of her past. But was their marriage truly a safe harbor, or were there cracks beneath the surface, waiting to shatter? As the embers cooled, only one question remained. What really ignited the destruction, a faulty heater or a deadly secret? Under the silent night sky of McNairy County, Tennessee, on November 3, 2009, a 911 call pierced the calm at 1:00 a.m., shattering the peace of the neighborhood. A panicked neighbor reported a fire at the home of Gary and Melissa Cole. "We woke up to the smell of smoke," the caller said. "My husband stepped out onto the back porch and saw their house engulfed in flames." Firefighters raced to the scene, red lights flashing against the billowing smoke. Onlookers held their breath, fearing for the lives of Melissa, Gary, and their 9-year-old son. If they were still inside, their chances of survival were grim. When the flames finally died down, all that remained of the house was a charred ruin. As firefighters sifted through the smoldering wreckage, they made a grim discovery, a burned body on what was left of the living room couch. It was a man. But if that was Gary Cole, where was Melissa? And had their 9-year-old son vanished with the fire? Melissa Broadwater, known as Missy to her family, grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee, with a childhood marred by trauma. From an early age, she endured abuse at the hands of her father. After her parents' divorce, she and her mother moved to Nashville, seeking a fresh start. But that hope was short-lived when her mother, Kay, remarried a man just as cruel. That marriage also ended in violence, leaving Melissa with deep emotional scars. These wounds shaped her into a rebellious teenager. At 17, she met James Bear, a 24-year-old electrician. Despite her mother's disapproval, she ran away with James and married him in 1987. When she became pregnant with their first child, Melissa felt happier than ever. Their daughter was born in 1988, followed by a son 3 years later. For over a decade, Melissa devoted herself to being a full-time mother. By 1998, she decided to return to work and took a part-time job at the electrical company where James worked. But working together didn't bring them closer. James was nearing 40 while Melissa had just turned 30. They drifted apart, their love fading. Melissa felt neglected, isolated in her own marriage. Then a co-worker took notice of her, Gary Cole. Unlike James, Gary was carefree, funny, and had a way of making Melissa feel special. What started as harmless jokes soon spiraled into a full-blown affair. Things became even more complicated when Melissa discovered she was pregnant with Gary's child. And this was only the beginning of a tragedy no one could have predicted. What shocked everyone the most wasn't Melissa's affair, it was the decision she made afterward. Instead of leaving Gary to return to her family, she chose to walk away from everything. Melissa's family was stunned when they learned that the once devoted mother had abandoned her 2 children, an 8-year-old boy and an 11-year-old girl, to pursue a new life with another man. Shortly after giving birth to Gary's child in 1999, Melissa cut off all contact with everyone, including James and her children. She and Gary moved to rural McNairy County, starting a new chapter. But just months after their son was born, in the spring of 2000, Gary began to change. His family noticed the difference. He was no longer the carefree, light-hearted man he used to be. As he reached his 40s, he struggled with the physically demanding nature of construction work. Financial pressure weighed heavily on the couple, and the marriage they had once dreamed of was no longer a fairy tale. After years of silence, Melissa unexpectedly reached out to her family. When she returned to Nashville with her youngest son, she was a completely different person. Her mother was shocked by the change. Missy, once bold and impulsive, was now timid and guarded, as if she were constantly afraid of something. Her eyes were empty, and whenever someone asked what had happened, she would evade the question with a simple, "I'm fine." No one knew exactly what had changed Melissa. Back at the burned house, as the sheriff's department began searching for her and her son, a terrifying truth started to emerge. They didn't know if the mother and child had been kidnapped or if they had fled. But as firefighters examined the ashes, they noticed something strange. The kitchen knives hadn't burned in the usual pattern. Instead of being scorched upward, they had burned downward, an unusual sign that suggested the fire hadn't started naturally. And if the fire wasn't an accident, what had really happened to Melissa Cole? McNairy County, Tennessee, November 3, 2009, around 1:30 a.m. The blaring red lights of fire trucks sliced through the darkness as firefighters rushed to the scene. Melissa and Gary Cole's house was engulfed in flames, the inferno raging too fiercely for any hope of survival. As the fire was finally brought under control, the firefighters began searching through the wreckage. A small crowd of friends and family gathered outside, anxiously waiting for news. Then, a devastating discovery: a charred body, seemingly that of an adult male, possibly Gary Cole. But Melissa and her son were nowhere to be found. People desperately tried calling Melissa's phone, but there was no answer. Meanwhile, authorities carefully collected what remained of the body, placing it in a black bag and sending it off for forensic examination. The remains were so badly burned that identification was nearly impossible. But the biggest question now was, where were Melissa and her son? Once the body was removed, the scene was turned over to the arson investigation team from the McNairy County Fire Marshal's office. Their job was difficult, dangerous, and time-consuming. A trained arson detection dog was also brought in to assist. But before the investigation could even begin, one of the experts noticed something crucial. With their experienced eye, they spotted an anomaly in the kitchen. The burn patterns didn't rise as they normally would. Instead, the fire had spread downward onto the floor, suggesting that a flammable liquid had been poured before the fire was set. Whether it was kerosene, gasoline, or some other accelerant, one thing was certain: this fire was no accident. The flames had started in the kitchen, but who had set them? And more importantly, where were Melissa and her son? While the arson investigation team continued working at the scene, the family was desperately trying to contact Melissa. Every call went unanswered until a few hours later, when Gary's brother checked his voicemail and discovered a message from her. "Has anyone seen Gary?" Melissa's voice in the message showed no sign that she was aware of what had happened. She didn't mention the fire, nor did she sound panicked or distraught. It was as if she had no idea about the tragedy that had occurred. Gary's brother immediately called her back, and this time Melissa answered. When he told her that their house had burned down and that Gary had died in the fire, she seemed shocked. He urged her to contact the sheriff immediately. That afternoon, Melissa arrived at the investigation office. Just hours after being informed that her husband had died in a devastating fire, she appeared dazed, but something seemed off. She told the police that Gary wasn't even supposed to be home at the time. According to Melissa, her husband had left town for a job interview in Memphis and had told her he would be gone for 2 to 3 days. She also explained that she had taken their son to Nashville to visit family, which was where she was when she received the call from Gary's brother. But if Gary was in Memphis, how could he have died in a fire at their home? When investigators spoke with Gary's family, they were equally confused. Melissa insisted. "Gary never goes anywhere without telling me first, and he certainly wouldn't leave town without informing his mother." So, had Gary actually left, or was he hiding something? And if he wasn't the one who started the fire, then who did? At the West Tennessee Regional Forensic Center, the autopsy results confirmed that the body recovered from the ashes was indeed Gary Cole. But what shocked investigators even more was the cause of death. Gary had not died in the fire. He had been shot. A single 9mm bullet was found lodged in the back of his head, a fatal execution-style shot. Police quickly ruled out the possibility of suicide. Someone had stood behind Gary and pulled the trigger. By the afternoon of November 4, more than 24 hours after the devastating fire, dental records finally confirmed the victim's identity. But now, this case was no longer just about a tragic house fire. It was murder. The fire had destroyed nearly the entire crime scene, making it difficult for investigators to find clues. But one thing was clear. Melissa and her son were not present when the fire broke out. This immediately put them at the top of the list of people to investigate. Gary's family told police that the couple had been struggling financially. Their debts had been piling up for the past 3 years, and the situation had only gotten worse. However, one surprising detail made investigators hesitate to suspect Melissa. If Melissa truly wanted to be free of Gary, she didn't need to kill him. On August 10, just 3 months before the murder, Gary had filed for divorce. If Melissa wanted out of the marriage, all she had to do was wait. So why was Gary murdered? And more importantly, who pulled the trigger? Just like when she left her first husband, Melissa seemed ready to walk away from her son with Gary. She did not fight for custody. In fact, she agreed to give Gary full parental rights. What was even more unusual was how peaceful their separation appeared to be. Melissa continued living in the house, sleeping in the back bedroom, while the divorce process was being finalized. But then something changed. Melissa began regretting giving up custody. That's when McNairy County authorities started asking more questions, especially about the timing of the divorce. November 5. The McNairy County Sheriff summoned Melissa for further questioning, this time asking her to bring her son with her. At the station, investigators separated the two, placing them in separate interrogation rooms. While Melissa waited, detectives focused on questioning her 9-year-old son. And then something unexpected happened. His story was completely different from his mother's. Contrary to what Melissa had told police, her son confirmed that his father was home that night. He also clearly remembered the night before the fire. On Sunday night, I was sleeping when I suddenly heard a loud bang. I woke up and ran out to see what had happened. Mom was standing there. I asked her what the noise was. She said she was wrapping Christmas presents and had accidentally dropped something. The police immediately knew this was a lie. Then, the boy continued, after that, I went back to bed. When I woke up the next morning, I saw Dad lying on the couch, completely covered by a blanket. I asked Mom what was wrong with him, and she said he was sick and told me not to touch him. Then she took me out for the whole day shopping. Mom told me to stay in the car while she bought things like a mop and cleaning supplies. The boy did not fully understand what had happened. But based on his story, investigators formed a terrifying theory. Melissa may have tried to clean up the crime scene, but her 9-year-old son had been there the entire time. After completing the interrogation with the son, the investigators entered Melissa's interrogation room. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. It was no longer a casual conversation like 2 days before they directly confronted Melissa with her son's testimony. Faced with mounting evidence, Melissa quickly broke down. With no way out, she was forced to confess the truth. According to Melissa's confession, on the morning of November 2, she and Gary had an argument while their son was still asleep. Initially, it was not a major fight, but the situation quickly escalated to a dangerous level. In a fit of rage, Gary stormed into the bedroom and then returned with a gun. Melissa claimed that Gary forced her to sit down in the living room, placed the gun on his lap, and threatened her. According to her, Gary suspected that she was reconsidering their custody agreement and planning to take their son away. After a tense standoff, Gary decided to put the gun back in the bedroom and returned to the sofa in the living room. Eventually, he fell asleep. At that moment, Melissa made a fateful decision. She believed she was in danger, that she knew exactly what kind of person Gary was, and that she needed to protect herself. She walked into the bedroom, took Gary's gun, and then returned to the living room. As Gary slept soundly on the sofa, Melissa raised the gun and pulled the trigger. Gary Cole died instantly. Although she admitted to shooting her husband, Melissa denied setting the house on fire. She said, "I didn't set the fire." "I don't think so." This vague statement raised suspicions among investigators. She neither fully denied her involvement in the arson, nor took responsibility for it. However, the fact that Melissa had killed her husband was undeniable. As soon as the interrogation ended, the sheriff's deputies entered the room and arrested Melissa on charges of murder. The trial begins. Nearly a year after Gary Cole's body was discovered in the smoldering remains of their home, 42-year-old Melissa Cole walked into the courtroom to face charges of murdering her husband. According to the prosecution, this was neither an accident nor an act of self-defense. They argued that Melissa had planned the murder to secure custody of her son, with their divorce set to be finalized in just 1 week. That fateful night, instead of allowing the legal system to determine the outcome, she picked up a gun, aimed it at the back of Gary's head, and pulled the trigger. Prosecutors charged her with first-degree murder and opened the trial with testimony from fire investigators who uncovered multiple signs that the house had been deliberately set ablaze to cover up the crime. However, the most crucial witness was none other than their 10-year-old son, who recounted the mysterious noises that night and his mother's strange behavior afterward. In contrast to the prosecution's accusations, Melissa did not deny shooting Gary, but she insisted it was an act of self-defense. She testified that for years, Gary had physically, emotionally, and sexually abused her, controlling every aspect of her life. On the morning of November 2, 2009, she claimed that Gary threatened her with a gun, forcing her to act first to protect herself. But one critical question remained. If she was truly an abused wife, why not wait just 1 more week for the divorce instead of killing her husband? Was it desperation or a calculated plan? Was she a victim or a murderer? The answer would be decided in the courtroom. October 7, 2010, the verdict inside a McNairy County courtroom in Tennessee. Melissa Cole sat in silence, awaiting her fate. The 42-year-old woman stood accused of shooting Gary Cole in the head, then setting their house on fire to conceal the crime. Throughout the trial, Melissa never denied pulling the trigger but maintained that she had done so as a battered woman fighting for her life. However, the jury remained unconvinced. In their final verdict, they found her guilty of murder, though not first-degree murder as originally charged. Instead, they convicted her of second-degree murder, acknowledging the killing was intentional but lacked the premeditation required for a first-degree charge. Additionally, the jury found her guilty of arson and evidence tampering. In the end, the judge sentenced Melissa to 25 years in prison, 21 years for second-degree murder, 4 years for arson. As the sentence was read aloud, Gary Cole's family breathed a sigh of relief, believing justice had finally been served. But for Melissa, was this truly punishment, or just the next chapter in the tragedy of her life? Amanda Cower was once a single mother, struggling to make ends meet, until she met Ira, the man who gave her what seemed to be a perfect little family. But behind the facade of happiness, Amanda sensed the storm brewing within her husband. Ira seemed to be battling invisible demons, and he began to suspect that Amanda, too, was hiding secrets of her own. Did these suspicions drive Ira to despair, and ultimately to his own death? Or was his tragic end not just an act of desperation, but one with a helping hand? New Underwood, South Dakota, November 28, 2010. A frantic 911 call came from 27-year-old Amanda Cower. In the call, she tearfully stated that her husband, 26-year-old Ira Cower, had shot himself in the head. When deputies and emergency medical personnel arrived at the scene, they found Amanda waiting outside, looking dazed. She led them down to the basement, where Ira lay motionless. Inside, police discovered Ira lying on a futon, surrounded by a large pool of blood. A gunshot wound to the head had taken his life. Amanda insisted that her husband had committed suicide. She claimed he was depressed, hopeless, and saw no reason to continue living. Everything seemed straightforward, a tragic suicide with nothing suspicious. But as investigators began to verify Amanda's statements, they soon realized that the truth was far from simple. Born in 1983, Amanda Kurowski spent most of her life in the Dakotas, though she grew up in Hillsboro. A popular girl in high school, her life took an unexpected turn when she became a mother at 18. Her son was born in 2001, followed by a daughter in 2003. However, Amanda was a single mother, struggling to raise 2 children on her own. By 2005, at the age of 21, she was living in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment, trying to support her family under difficult circumstances. But in February of that year, her life changed forever when she met Ira Cower, an Air Force pilot, at a bar in Grand Forks. Ira had grown up in a trailer park, a quiet and sensitive young man. On February 2005, he turned 21 and decided to celebrate this milestone at a bar where fate led him straight to Amanda. Just months into their relationship, Ira told his friends in the military that he and Amanda were married. No longer a single mother, Amanda now had a husband, but life remained challenging for their young family. She worked at a convenience store on the base while studying to become a hairstylist. Meanwhile, Ira's Air Force salary wasn't enough to cover their expenses, so he took on night shifts delivering pizzas to earn extra money. Despite the hardships, Ira never complained about supporting Amanda's children. In fact, he genuinely loved and cared for them as if they were his own. In 2007, Ira and his family moved to Ellsworth Air Force Base near Rapid City. Despite being busy with their new life, he continued his education and graduated with a bachelor's degree in 2009. His job at the Officer Candidate School opened up promising career prospects, marking a significant advancement in his professional life. Once settled in Ellsworth, the couple decided to buy a house and started planning for their future. After nearly 5 years together, the children were already calling Ira Dad. To make this bond official, Amanda and Ira filed for adoption. A stable career, 2 growing children, and the prospect of expanding their family, it all seemed like a great accomplishment for a couple still in their 20s. However, not everything was going smoothly. Some of Ira's friends noticed that pursuing a master's degree was putting immense pressure on him. The couple had little time for each other, and they tried to rekindle their bond by going out for drinks. But by the summer of 2010, Ira had almost stopped going out, while Amanda continued. She went to the bar 2 to 3 times a week, not because of alcohol addiction, but simply to relax and socialize. At the bar, Amanda often chatted with Kim Karp, the bar owner. In one conversation, she admitted that she didn't necessarily love Ira. She knew he would take care of her and the kids, and for her, that was enough. But over time, Amanda felt that Ira was becoming increasingly emotionally needy. According to her, he often cried, seeking comfort, and was becoming more emotionally dependent on her. Was this just a sign of a troubled marriage? Or was there something deeper and more unsettling happening in their family? Tension was mounting for Ira. He worked full-time, from 7:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. every day, while also carrying the responsibilities of being a husband and father of two. The physical and emotional exhaustion was taking a toll on him. Amanda confided in Kim that Ira had fallen into deep depression. According to her, by September he had become so desperate that he went to the garage and attempted to hang himself. Was this a tragic warning of what was to come? Or was there something more sinister behind his despair? On November 28, 2010, a panic 911 call was made. Amanda Cower, her voice trembling, reported that she had just found her husband, Air Force pilot Ira Cower, dead in the basement. When police arrived at the scene, they found Amanda sobbing, leading them to where Ira's body lay on a futon mattress, covered with a blanket. A gunshot wound to the head had taken his life. Initially, all signs pointed to suicide. On Ira's bedside, officers found a note in which he mentioned the pressure of work weighing down on him. But one crucial detail made an officer question the situation. If Ira had shot himself, where was the gun? Amanda explained that after discovering her husband, she had picked up the gun and put it away for safety, not wanting the children to see it. She showed the police where she had placed it on top of the refrigerator, wrapped in a towel. The weapon was a Bersa, .45 caliber pistol. After confirming Ira's death, paramedics left the scene, while investigators from the sheriff's department arrived to conduct a thorough examination. And that was when they discovered something unusual. Ira hadn't been shot once but twice. Blood in Ira's hair had concealed a second gunshot wound. This immediately shattered the suicide theory that Amanda had described. No one could shoot themselves in the head twice. Ira's body was transported to the Rapid City morgue for an autopsy, while Amanda was taken to a public safety building for a formal interrogation. The investigation into Ira Cower's death had now taken a dramatic turn. It was no longer just a suicide, but a mystery filled with disturbing questions. During questioning, Amanda Cower insisted to investigators that her husband, Ira, had been struggling emotionally for a long time. She claimed he had previously attempted suicide multiple times, and this time he had succeeded. Amanda stated that she had actually heard the first gunshot. According to her, at around 7 a.m., she was lying in bed when she was startled by a loud noise coming from the basement. Worried, she went to the basement door and called down to Ira, asking what had happened. But according to her, Ira responded, "Nothing." Believing that he had simply dropped something or had gone back to sleep, Amanda continued her morning as usual. She took the children out for breakfast and went to the Ellsworth Air Force Base commissary for groceries. At approximately 12:30 p.m., when she returned home and was putting the groceries away, Amanda walked to the top of the basement stairs and called for Ira. This time he didn't respond. Sensing that something was wrong, she went downstairs and found her husband lying motionless in a pool of blood. Panicked, she pulled a blanket over him, picked up the gun, carried it upstairs, and called 911. Everything seemed logical until investigators asked one key question: where did Ira get the gun? Amanda explained that since Ira was in the Air Force, he wanted her to own a firearm for self-protection. After much persuasion, she finally agreed, and they purchased a gun registered in her name. But something didn't sit right with the investigators. What kind of man pressures his wife into buying a gun for protection, only to then use that very gun to kill himself? The following day, investigators received the medical examiner's autopsy report. It confirmed that the first shot had been to the side of Ira's head, while the second shot was in the center of his head. According to the medical examiner, the first gunshot was not immediately fatal, but it was severe enough to render Ira brain dead. The examiner was adamant Ira would not have been able to fire a second shot. Ira hadn't died by suicide. Someone had pulled the trigger again. On the morning of November 29, 2010, exactly 24 hours after Amanda Cower's frantic 911 call, news of Ira's death had spread throughout the small town of New Underwood and Ellsworth Air Force Base. But not everyone believed that Ira had taken his own life. Investigators from the Pennington County Sheriff's Department shared the same doubts, not just because Ira had been shot twice, but because of a crucial finding in the autopsy report. Ira could not have fired the second shot himself. At this point, Amanda's suicide narrative had almost completely collapsed. Investigators traced the .45 caliber pistol that had ended Ira's life and discovered that it had been purchased at a pawn shop. When questioned, Amanda claimed she had bought the gun at Ira's request. She said that her husband and their 2 children had waited outside in the car while she went inside to make the purchase. However, security camera footage from the parking lot revealed a different truth. Amanda had gone to the pawn shop alone, without Ira or the children. It didn't stop there. The shopkeeper also vividly remembered Amanda. He recalled that he had initially tried to sell her a .22 caliber pistol, but Amanda had immediately rejected it. Her words at the time were unforgettable. "I need a gun that can take down an average-sized man." As investigators left the pawn shop, they were nearly certain Amanda Cower was not the grieving widow of a suicide victim. She was a murderer. But the biggest question remained. Why did Amanda want Ira dead? That same day, the case took a shocking turn when Ira's close friend, James Mills, called the sheriff's department with a startling lead. According to Mills, Ira had long harbored suspicions he believed his wife, Amanda, was having an affair. Her alleged lover? None other than Dallas Madsen, a local ranch owner. Mills revealed that Amanda and Dallas frequently met at a bar, and their relationship seemed far more intimate than just friendship. 2 months before his death, Ira had confronted Amanda about the affair. Immediately, investigators headed to the local bar to verify the claim. The bar owner confirmed that Ira hadn't just confronted his wife, he had also directly questioned Dallas about his relationship with Amanda. But how had Dallas reacted? Was he just an unfaithful lover, or did he play a bigger role in Ira's death? And most importantly, if Ira had discovered Amanda's infidelity, was that the reason she wanted him gone? 2 days after the shooting, on November 30, the police decided to bring in Dallas Madsen for questioning. At first, Dallas denied all accusations, insisting that he was just a friend of Amanda. But when pressed, he was forced to admit the truth. He and Amanda were romantically involved. However, Dallas firmly maintained that he had nothing to do with Ira's death and had no knowledge of what happened that night. The police set Dallas aside and turned their attention back to Amanda. Immediately after questioning Dallas, investigators confronted Amanda Cower. When they informed her that Dallas had cooperated with authorities, she began to panic. She became flustered, confused, and visibly anxious. Finally, she decided to confess. According to Amanda, Ira had fired the first shot himself. When she came downstairs, he was still alive. As she turned to call 911, Ira stopped her and begged her to end his suffering. The police were immediately skeptical. With his first gunshot wound, Ira wouldn't have been conscious enough to speak, let alone plead for Amanda to kill him. Investigators continued pressing her. When caught in a lie, Amanda quickly changed her story again. This time, she claimed that Ira was holding the gun when she entered the basement. She tried to wrestle it away from him, and during the struggle, the gun accidentally went off. But the police didn't believe her. Ira's wounds didn't match a struggle for the gun. Cornered, Amanda finally admitted the truth. She had murdered her husband. The police immediately arrested Amanda Cower, charging her with first-degree murder. On June 7, 2011, 28-year-old Amanda Cower walked into a South Dakota courtroom to face charges for killing her husband. Since the beginning of the investigation, Amanda had changed her story multiple times. First statement: she claimed she found her husband dead when she returned home. Second statement: she confessed to helping him die after a failed suicide attempt. Third statement: she insisted she accidentally shot Ira while trying to stop him from taking his own life. Final story: she described a struggle for the gun, saying that Ira was gravely wounded after the first shot and begged her to end his suffering. She reluctantly fired the second shot, but the police didn't believe any of her stories. Ira's injuries proved he couldn't have pleaded for anything after the first shot. Then came the most damning evidence. Amanda's internet search history revealed a chilling truth. She had researched firearms, comparing different calibers .22.40, .45, knowing that a .22 caliber gun wasn't powerful enough to kill someone with a single shot. She specifically chose a .45 caliber pistol, a gun strong enough to ensure an instant, fatal outcome. On the morning of November 28, 2010, while the small town of New Underwood was still enveloped in tranquility, a silent tragedy unfolded in the basement of Amanda Cower's home. Just hours before the shooting, Amanda accessed two websites with chilling content: how to shoot someone in the head for an instant kill. She then walked down to the basement, aimed directly at her husband, Ira Cower, and pulled the trigger. However, the first shot did not kill Ira immediately. Amanda went upstairs as if nothing had happened and continued preparing breakfast for her children. Her plan was clear: wait for Ira to bleed to death while going about her daily routine. But there was one thing Amanda did not anticipate. Ira was still alive when she returned home in the afternoon. Seeing him barely clinging to life, she went back online searching for answers. Why hadn't he died yet? At that moment, Amanda realized the first shot hadn't been fatal enough. Coldly, she walked down to the basement again and fired a second shot, ending Ira's life. To cover up her crime, she staged the scene as a suicide, even planting a mysterious suicide note next to his body. Prosecutors feared that Amanda's fabricated suicide scenario might sway the jury. To prevent this, they offered her a plea deal. If she admitted guilt, her charge would be reduced to first-degree manslaughter, carrying a maximum sentence of 65 years, instead of facing life imprisonment for first-degree murder. On June 7, 2011, Amanda entered the South Dakota courtroom. Before the judge, she pleaded guilty but still clung to her false narrative, insisting that the first shot was accidental during a struggle. She admitted to firing the second shot, but claimed it was to end her husband's suffering. Prosecutors were frustrated by this half-hearted confession. They approached the judge with an unusual request. If the judge agreed, they were prepared to take her to trial for first-degree murder. On September 19, 2011, the South Dakota courtroom was tenser than ever. After hours of intense arguments, both sides fought to present their strongest cases. But there was a major issue. There wasn't enough concrete evidence to convict Amanda Cower of first-degree murder, meaning it could not be definitively proven that she had premeditated her husband's killing. In the end, the judge issued the verdict. Amanda was sentenced to over 32 years in prison before becoming eligible for parole. While it wasn't the harshest possible sentence, Ira Cower's family and friends felt satisfied. Justice had been served, but was it enough? Kimberly Parker and her husband Elahu once had a bright future. They were deeply in love, and the dreams ahead seemed endless. But then, on a fateful day, Elahu disappeared. He didn't show up for work. No one saw him. His phone was silent, not a single trace. The police got involved. Theories were raised. Had he left on his own? Was he kidnapped? Had he met with a mysterious accident? As clues slowly emerged, the question was no longer just where is Elahu, but also what role did Kimberly play in all of this? Louisville, Texas, July 31, 2000. Sergeant Greg Striblin arrived at the Louisville recruitment station at 7:30 a.m., just like any other day. But this morning, something felt off. One of his young Marines, Elihu Parker, who was always punctual, had yet to show up. At first, it seemed like it could be just a minor delay, but as time passed with no news from Elihu, worry began to build. Calls went unanswered. Messages were ignored. Elihu's superiors and colleagues started feeling uneasy. Deciding not to wait any longer, Sergeant Striblin drove to Elihu's apartment. He knocked on the door. No response. An eerie silence filled the air. Without hesitation, Striblin tried the doorknob and found it unlocked. He stepped inside cautiously. The apartment looked normal, but then something made him stop in his tracks. The TV was still on. A chilling sensation crept down his spine. Looking around, he noticed the security system of the apartment complex. The uneasy feeling in his gut grew stronger. Sergeant Striblin wasted no time. He called the police and officially reported Elihu Parker's disappearance. But when the police reached out to Kimberly Parker, Elihu's wife, her reaction left everyone stunned. She did not seem worried about her missing husband. The only thing Kimberly cared about was not where Elihu was, but where his car had gone. Born in 1977, Kimberly Hawkins grew up in a peaceful childhood in San Diego. She was a hard-working, sociable girl with good academic performance. When she graduated from high school, a promising future seemed to await her. On a fateful day at Disney World, during a double date, Kimberly met Elihu Parker, a young man who had just finished high school. They were quickly drawn to each other, sharing joyful moments that seemed like something out of a romantic story. But there was an obstacle. Elihu had just joined the Marine Corps and was about to be deployed overseas. A year later, while stationed in the Pacific, Elihu had not forgotten Kimberly. He was captivated by her intelligence and independence. While Elihu was fulfilling his military duties, Kimberly was building her own future, working and attending a vocational school. Their relationship endured through letters, rushed phone calls, and brief moments together whenever Elihu was on leave. Then one day, in front of Kimberly's family, Elihu got down on one knee and proposed. She was stunned. Kimberly's parents were worried that it was too soon for their daughter to enter marriage. But they couldn't deny one thing. Elihu was a good man, and Kimberly loved him deeply. The Marine Corps held Elihu Parker in high regard. 2 days after his wedding in May 1999, he was promoted to sergeant and assigned as a recruiter, a major step forward in his career. Elihu was on a promising trajectory. In April 2000, the Parkers moved to Texas, opening up new opportunities. Kimberly quickly adapted to a new life, even impressing her husband's superiors. Despite the usual challenges of newlyweds, they gradually settled in a private apartment, a new job for Kimberly at Silverleaf Telemarketing in Carrollton, Texas. This job not only provided her with extra income, but also gave her a sense of independence. But Kimberly didn't stop there. Less than 2 months after arriving in Louisville, they had bought a house and a car, all signs of a bright beginning. Yet, instead of enjoying married life with Elihu, Kimberly was about to become the central figure in a tense missing person investigation. The police would launch a frantic search for her suddenly vanished husband, and as the hunt for Elihu progressed, shocking truths about Kimberly's marriage would come to light. On Tuesday morning, August 1, it had been over 24 hours since Elihu Parker failed to show up for work. A missing Marine was no ordinary occurrence, but what caught investigators' attention even more was the strange reaction of his wife, 23-year-old Kimberly Parker. When police contacted Kimberly, she seemed indifferent to her husband's disappearance. While friends and colleagues worriedly searched for him, the only thing she cared about was the whereabouts of Elihu's car. Subsequent investigations revealed a troubling reality. Their seemingly happy marriage had fractured just 6 weeks in. Though separated, Elihu continued paying Kimberly's rent, and they even shared use of his car. But according to Elihu's colleagues, this arrangement quickly became a source of conflict. Elihu began to suspect that Kimberly wasn't the only one driving the car. When he confronted her, a heated argument erupted. Afterward, Kimberly started hiding the car, forcing Elihu to sneak around to find it. Their cat-and-mouse game stretched on for days. But then, within a week, their dispute over the car suddenly reached a breaking point. On July 27, 4 days before Elihu Parker disappeared, a strange incident occurred. That day, 2 young men showed up at the recruitment office where Elihu worked. But they weren't there to enlist. Instead, they demanded access to Elihu's car. When he refused and told them they'd have to wait until he was off duty, the situation escalated quickly. According to Elihu's colleagues, one of the men openly threatened to kill him right in front of them. The tension was only diffused when an officer arrived at the scene, and the 2 men left without further action. At first glance, the incident seemed like nothing more than a meaningless confrontation. But 4 days later, Elihu mysteriously vanished. Investigators couldn't ignore the suspicious coincidence. Who were those 2 men? Why were they after Elihu? What did they really want? Yet as police revisited the incident, they discovered a major problem. No one had recorded the identities of the 2 men. When investigators arrived at Kimberly Parker's apartment and knocked on the door, they immediately noticed a stark change. This time, Kimberly was no longer indifferent to her husband's disappearance as she had been before. Instead, she appeared anxious, flustered, and extremely uncooperative, an unusual reaction for a wife whose husband had just vanished. Standing firmly in the doorway, she was clearly trying to prevent the investigators from entering. But what caught the police's attention even more were the 3 men inside the apartment. When asked to provide identification, their identities were quickly confirmed. Damian Huckabee, 22 years old, along with his 2 friends, Dexter Hodge and Kendall Watson. None of them appeared to be law-abiding citizens. Their evasiveness only heightened the investigators' suspicions. When one of the officers took out a camera and started taking pictures of them, the atmosphere in the apartment grew tense. Despite Kimberly's attempts to cover things up, the police had gotten what they needed. After leaving the apartment, they headed straight to the recruitment office where Elihu Parker worked to continue following the trail. When the photos were shown to Elihu's colleagues, one statement sent chills down the investigators' spines. "That's him, no doubt. That's Damian Huckabee. He's the one who threatened to kill Elihu right here just 4 days ago. And that very day, a call from the Smith County Sheriff's Office in East Texas confirmed their worst fears. A body had just been pulled from the Sabine River. A fisherman had accidentally discovered a floating corpse the day before in a remote area of East Texas. When authorities arrived and retrieved the body from the water, one thing was immediately clear: this was no accident. The victim's hands and feet were tightly bound with duct tape, the body wrapped in plastic wrap, clear signs of a deliberate murder. Upon searching the body, investigators found an identification card still in the victim's pocket. The name on the card left everyone stunned: Elihu Parker. He was no longer missing, but the investigation was far from over. An even more shocking discovery was made: a fatal gunshot wound to Elihu's chest. Police were beginning to uncover the horrific details of Elihu Parker's final moments. On August 3, 2000, Louisville police grew increasingly suspicious that 23-year-old Kimberly Parker knew more about her husband's disappearance than she was willing to admit. From the start, she had been evasive, refusing to answer questions. But did this mean she was directly involved in the crime, or was she simply trying to protect the real killer? When investigators received confirmation that Elihu Parker's body had been found, they immediately went to Kimberly's apartment with a new set of questions. Right there, they told her the truth: her husband was dead. Kimberly was shocked, her reaction unexpected. But was it genuine emotion, or just a well-rehearsed act? After calming down, Kimberly was asked to come to the police station for further questioning. But she wasn't the only one being summoned. 3 other men suspected of involvement in the case were also taken in for interrogation: Damian Huckabee, 22, along with his 2 friends, Dexter Hodge and Kendall Watson. Notably, Damian was no stranger to the case. Just 4 days before Elihu vanished, He had a tense confrontation with him at the recruitment office and even threatened to kill him in front of multiple witnesses. At the police station, Kimberly finally admitted that she knew Damien Huckabee through her job at the telemarketing company. They weren't just co-workers. Damien and Kimberly had grown close. In fact, they had even been romantically involved during the period when Kimberly and Elihu were briefly separated. However, despite admitting to this, Kimberly insisted that their relationship had nothing to do with Elihu's disappearance or death. But was her word trustworthy? Or was this just a clever cover for a far darker conspiracy? On July 30, according to Kimberly, she spent the entire evening with Damien Huckabee and his group of friends because Elihu was absent. She claimed that they went to see a movie at Grapevine Mills Mall while Elihu was not there. When the police interrogated Damien, Dexter, and Kendall, all three provided a similar story. They had gone to a shopping mall. However, there was a major flaw in their statements. They could not agree on which shopping mall they had actually visited. Noticing this inconsistency, the investigators decided to put pressure on Damien. When confronted, he could not deny that he was the one who had threatened to kill Elihu in front of his colleagues at the recruitment office. However, he insisted that the incident had nothing to do with the murder. But then Damien revealed an important name, the man who had accompanied him to the recruitment office that day, Marcus Brown. Investigators immediately dug deeper, and suspicious truths began to emerge. Marcus Brown lived in Smith County, not far from where Elihu's body was discovered. This could not be a mere coincidence. 5 days later, the Smith County Sheriff's Office tracked down Marcus, who was identified as the fifth member of this dark conspiracy. When brought into the interrogation room, Marcus, a large man who appeared slow-witted but was actually dangerous, admitted that he had been with Damien on the day of the confrontation with Elihu at the recruitment office. However, that was not all Marcus confessed. He also told investigators that Damien and his friends had spent the following days plotting something. He did not just tell the police that Damien and his friends conspired to kill Elihu. He claimed that Kimberly was the mastermind behind the entire plan. According to Marcus's testimony, Kimberly had plotted to kill Elihu to claim his $200 insurance policy. She was not just the mastermind, she had also directly helped the killers gain access to Elihu's apartment complex. Marcus recounted that on that fateful night, he, Damien, Dexter, and Kendall hid in the shadows while Kimberly called Elihu out from the apartment complex gate. Without any suspicion, Elihu stepped out, unaware that the wife he trusted was leading him into a trap. As soon as Elihu appeared, the group of assassins rushed into his apartment. Elihu fought back fiercely, but the struggle suddenly ended when Damien pulled out a gun, forcing Elihu into submission. According to Marcus, after subduing Elihu, the group dragged him outside, stuffed him into the trunk of a Honda Civic, and drove straight to East Texas. Kimberly did not go with them. She had already played her part. Marcus testified that when they reached Smith County, he began to fear that he himself might be eliminated just like Elihu. He demanded that Damien drop him off, leaving the group before things took a worse turn. But who was the one who pulled the trigger and killed Elihu? Marcus claimed that he did not know exactly where Elihu was murdered or who fired the fatal shot. That night, the Smith County authorities arrested Marcus on charges of kidnapping. The next morning, on August 9, Louisville police once again knocked on Kimberly's door, but this time they had a warrant for her arrest. As they entered, they discovered Damien, Dexter, and Kendall hiding in a back bedroom, curled up under blankets, trying to conceal their presence. All four were handcuffed, despite Kimberly's fierce resistance as she screamed and struggled. In the interrogation room, Kimberly remained silent, refusing to cooperate and demanding a lawyer. But Kendall and Dexter were different. When investigators revealed that Marcus Brown had confessed to everything, the two quickly started talking. Both confirmed Marcus's testimony. Kimberly was the first to propose killing Elihu. She had meticulously planned the ambush, clearing the way for the killers to act. They also confirmed an even more horrifying truth. When they arrived in Smith County, Marcus had been left behind, while the rest of the group drove deeper into a remote forest. There, Elihu begged for his life, but Damien was unmoved. A cold-blooded gunshot ended Elihu Parker's life. After the execution, Dexter and Kendall testified that they left the body in the forest overnight. But the horror wasn't over yet. The next morning, they returned to dispose of the corpse. And that was when they discovered a chilling truth. Elihu was still alive. Not giving him another chance, they wrapped duct tape around his arms, legs, and torso, then threw him into the river, letting the water carry everything away. On June 12, 2001, Kimberly Parker's trial officially began in Denton County, Texas. She was prosecuted for aggravated kidnapping and murder in connection with the disappearance and death of her estranged husband, Elihu Parker, a U.S. Marine. As the prosecution began its opening statement, they exposed the true nature of Kimberly Parker, portraying her as a manipulative and sociopathic mastermind. They argued that everyone involved in the case was part of a premeditated murder plot, a scheme orchestrated entirely by Kimberly Parker. However, the defense painted a completely different picture. They claimed Kimberly was an innocent victim, caught in a plan she had no knowledge of. Instead of blaming Kimberly, the defense attacked Damien Huckabee, asserting that he was the true mastermind behind the kidnapping and murder. But Damien had no intention of helping Kimberly avoid conviction. While awaiting trial for aggravated kidnapping, he refused any plea deals in exchange for testifying against his girlfriend. That did not discourage the prosecution. They had a more crucial witness, Marcus Brown. On the witness stand, Marcus Brown reaffirmed his previous confession, detailing how Kimberly Parker recruited 4 men to participate in the murder plot. He testified that Kimberly was the one who told the group about the $200,000 Marine Corps insurance policy, which she believed would be hers once Elihu was dead. When it was the defense's turn, they made the bold decision to put Kimberly on the witness stand. As expected, Kimberly completely denied Marcus's testimony, claiming it was all lies. Kimberly Parker took the stand, calmly recounting her version of events. She insisted that everything spiraled out of control the moment Damien Huckabee and his accomplices stormed into Elihu's apartment. According to Kimberly, Damien pulled out a gun, and at that moment, she knew things would not go as originally planned. She testified that Damien and his accomplices forced Elihu down the stairs and locked him in the trunk of a car. Kimberly claimed she did not participate in the crime. On the contrary, she said Damien even dropped her off as she requested and reassured her that everything would be fine. But the horrifying truth hit her the next day when Damien came to see her and casually confessed, "We killed him." Kimberly claimed she was shocked and furious. When the two returned to her apartment, an argument erupted, quickly escalating into a physical altercation. According to her testimony, Damien pulled out a gun again, this time pressing it against her head. "He kept asking me if I would dare betray him," Kimberly testified in court. And that, according to Kimberly, was why she never went to the police about the murder. However, the prosecution was not about to let her escape justice. In their closing argument, they painted a completely different picture. Kimberly was not a victim, but the mastermind of this brutal murder. Who would the jury believe? On June 14, 2001, the jury reached its final verdict. Kimberly Parker was guilty. The courtroom fell silent as the judge handed down the sentence, 99 years in prison for Kimberly, effectively ending any chance of freedom for the rest of her life. Damien Huckabee and Kendall Watson, the 2 men directly involved in the murder, received life sentences without the possibility of parole. Meanwhile, Dexter Hodge, who agreed to cooperate with authorities, received a lighter sentence, 40 years in prison. The door closed on all those involved. The shocking case finally came to an end, but the price paid was the life of an innocent man.